Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to day 4 of our Secret Path Week events. As we gather today, we are reminded that throughout Canada, we are situated on Indigenous lands, both ceded treaty and unceded land. This land is steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. As a country, we have a responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we live and work. So today I acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the neutral people on whose territory I am broadcasting from. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. I run an organization called Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. We connect classrooms all across North America with scientists, explorers, adventurers, and conservationists for live guest speaking events, virtual field trips. If you check out exploringbytheseat.com, you can find 40, 50, even 60 live events every month for your classroom to jump into and learn with us. So this is our 3rd year collaborating with the Gord Downie and Chenny Wenjack Fund to bring Indigenous leaders, artists, and scientists live to classrooms across Canada. We have an incredible week in store. It's already underway with 20 live events, including musical performances, language lessons, storytelling, and so much more. The Gord Downie and Chenny Wenjack Fund is part of musician Gord Downie's legacy and embodies his commitment and that of both the Downie and Wenjack families to build cultural understanding and create a path towards reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. So the goal of the Downie Wenjack Fund is to continue the conversation that began with Chenny Wenjack's residential school story and to support the reconciliation process through awareness, education, and action. Now, many classrooms joining us right now, whether you're on YouTube or live in a camera spot, you're already doing something towards meaningful acts of reconciliation. As Legacy Schools. Now, if you haven't heard of this program, the Legacy Schools program is a free national initiative to engage, empower, and connect students and educators to further reconciliation through awareness, education, and action. So if you visit the downeywenjack.ca, you can find that website there, and you can learn more about how your school, how your classroom can become a Legacy School. You'll get a great toolkit and be able to start participating in meaningful acts of reconciliation in your communities, your schools, and in your home. Okay, well, we have a really exciting event right now. We are connecting with Aaron Yazzie. He is a mechanical engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He designs, builds, and tests robotic systems to acquire samples of rocks and soil from other planets so we can study them for science. He's had roles on the Mars Science Laboratory Rover mission and the InSight Mars lander, and developed drill bits that are being used on the Mars 2020 rover. Aaron is Navajo, originally from a small town near the border of the Navajo Nation. He is passionate about spreading excitement of STEM to students from his home community and across the nation. So let's bring Aaron in with us right now. Hey, Aaron, how are you doing today?
Hi, everybody. I'm doing great. It's good to be here.
All right. Well, Aaron, it's great to see you. We love having you join in. The last few years, you've joined us for space exploration events, for Secret Path Week events, and for combos of the two. So it's so great to have you live with us today.
Yeah, I agree. I've really enjoyed being part of this event every year. And like you said, both part of the Space Week and part of the Secret Path Week, because I love that the things that I do and both the identities I have as an Indigenous person, but also as an engineer that works in space exploration, how they can overlap in this way. So it's amazing to be here with all of you guys. So thank you so much for having me.
All right, good stuff. Well, classrooms tuning in on YouTube, take a minute in the comments, introduce yourself, let us know where you're tuning in from. But for now, Aaron, I'm going to let you take over for a little bit, and then we'll jump into some Q&A action.
Sure thing. So that was an excellent introduction. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to take a little moment right now to introduce myself in my own language, the Navajo language. Yad she'e Aaron Yazzie and Ashihen Nishle, Todachitni Bashis Chin, Kia Ani Dashache, Tohana Dashanella, Kut Agoe the Net Nishle. So what that translates to is, hello, my name is Aaron Yazzie. I'm of the Salt clan. That is a clan that I inherited from my mother, and she got it from her mother, and so on. My second clan is my father's clan, Bitterwater, and he got it from his mother and their mother, or his grandmother, and so on. My third clan is my mother's father's clan, which is the Towering House people, and my fourth clan is my father's father's clan, which is Near the Water people. So we Navajo passed down these clans through our mothers. And it's a way for us to identify ourselves, but also identify our relationships to each other. So if I met somebody who also had the same first clan as me, we would treat each other as brother and sister. So it's just another way for us to relate to each other. I'm calling in to this meeting from the Los Angeles area, and that is the historical lands of the Tongva people who have been here many, many, many years and cultivated and cared for this land before there was contact. And I am working here. I've been living in this area for 13 years now as a mechanical engineer for NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And so I have some really cool slides and pictures to show you about my time in the past 5 years or so working on the Perseverance mission, which, if you've been able to pay attention to the news, landed successfully on Mars earlier this year and has just been doing some incredible work, taking some incredible pictures, and I want to share that with you guys today. All right. Okay, let me change this into presentation mode. And if I could get, all right, there we go. Okay, so to start off, this is a continuation of the introduction that I just gave. I was born in Tuba City, Arizona, which is on the Navajo Nation. You can see the Navajo Nation on this map on the left is shown in the sort of the darker red area. That's where the Navajo people have lived for a long time. And then also right in the middle of that, it's kind of circling another piece of land, which is the Hopi land. And that's also in the area. There's also a lot of Apache nations in the area and Pueblo nations. I grew up in a small town called Holbrook, Arizona, just off the border of the Navajo reservation. And I went to school at Stanford. I went to Stanford to get a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. And then I got my job after that and moved down to Pasadena, California, where I've been working as a mechanical engineer at NASA JPL. And I list in here a bunch of things that I did in between all those steps because, of course, those are such broad strokes. But there's so many little things that helped me get to where I am today, and those are all little summer programs and internships that I was involved in. So for those of you who are all wondering about how you can start to move into this area and maybe become an engineer or a scientist yourself, I encourage you to explore it when you're young, now or even when you get into junior high and high school. Do summer programs, go to camps and all that stuff to help explore your interest in that area. But of course, I wouldn't be anywhere without a whole bunch of stuff that happened before this. So I want to acknowledge that all of this didn't start with just me. My parents did some amazing work, and my grandparents did some amazing work, and their parents before them. Just so many generations of resilience and advancement in order to ensure that when I started my life, that I was ready and set up for success. And so here's some pictures of my grandparents. These are my mom's parents on the top right, and then my dad's parents in the middle, and of course my parents at the bottom at my graduation from Stanford. And I also made sure to change the just to acknowledge the places that I've been were also all originally lands that were inhabited and cared for by indigenous people. So I went from the Navajo, Hopi, Pueblo, Apache lands to the Muwekma Ohlone lands, which is up in the Bay Area of California. And now I'm currently living in the Tongva lands. So it's always good to acknowledge where you've come from and the people who have helped to get you there. So to start off my talk about Mars, I want to show you some pictures of Earth. So here's two pictures side by side. The picture on the left is of the foothills of Gale Crater on Mars. This picture was taken by the Curiosity rover. And the picture on the right is a picture taken by my brother of me standing on the Navajo Nation near an area called Tuba City, Arizona. And they call this area the Painted Desert. And you can kind of see why. In the background, there's all these really amazing colors on the mesas. And I really like to, when I saw this picture of Mars, I was like, that looks like like home that looks like where I'm from. And like you can see the colors and the hills behind us. You can see that there's rocks distributed on the ground at our feet. One thing I want to just um, uh, emphasize is that Mars and Earth are similar for a reason. It's not just a coincidence. It's because they're similar planets. And so here's some more pictures to help prove that. Here's another area in Arizona it's an area called Lake Powell. In this area, there's a giant canyon, and then they actually put up a dam there. So now there's a lake there, and the whole area is made out of these sandstone cliffs. So there's me on the left standing on one of those cliffs, and on the right is a picture of Vera Rubin Ridge taken by the Curiosity rover on Mars. And once again, you can see the similarities and just how the cliffs look and the colors. It's very likely that the Vera Rubin Ridge picture you're seeing is also sandstone. Here's some more pictures. These are two mesas that are located on Mars, and to compare that to these mesas that are on Earth. And this is a picture I took in really close to where my grandparents live, on the Navajo Nation. And so I wanted to show all these pictures to just bring home the fact that Mars and Earth are both what we call terrestrial planets. And what that means is that they're both rocky planets. They're both, they have a core, a mantle, and a crust. And we know that here on Earth, a lot of our landforms were made by things like earthquakes and by water. We know that lots of canyons were made by rivers that sort of carved out canyons. We know that tectonic activity, we know that volcanic activity can sometimes make landforms, and just erosion and weather and the way that our Earth evolved over time is what created our landforms. But all of that, those same forces are what created the landforms on Mars, which is why Mars looks the same. They also have Marsquakes, just like we have earthquakes. They have volcanoes, just like we have volcanoes. Mars once had water all over its surface, and so that's why Mars also has giant canyons, and it has washes and gullies, and it has giant craters and ancient lake beds. So when we're sending things to Mars to study Mars, we're actually learning a lot about terrestrial planets, about rocky planets, just like our own planet. So here's sort of a family picture of a lot of missions that the previous missions that we've sent to Mars, all of them with different purposes. The smallest one, Sojourner, was just sent there to prove that we could drive a robot on another planet. The next one, the Mars Exploration Rovers, or MER rovers, were sent there to look for water, and they found it. They found traces of ancient water on Mars. The Mars Science Laboratory rover, the big one in the back, was sent to see if Mars's atmosphere and climate and geology could even host life. Like, are all the elements there that could even make life possible? And it found that yes, all the stuff that we know life needs exists on Mars as well. So Mars 2020, the rover on the left, we finally sent that rover there to help us answer the question once and for all: was there ancient life on Mars? And the way that we're going to do that is by studying its very ancient past, which is hidden within the rocks on Mars. And so what we're looking for is something like this. The picture on the left is taken in the bottom of a body of water, and there's these things called stromatolites. These are things that are actual living organisms. They're kind of like pond scum, or those simple single cell types of forms of life are the earliest forms of life that we've traced here on Earth. And we found that through fossils that we found on Earth. So that the picture on the top right is a fossil of a stromatolite that that developed on Earth billions of years ago. And so what we want to do is find this kind of fossil on Mars to see if we could find an ancient fossilized microbial life. And the way we're going to do that is by drilling into the rocks where all of these fossils are hidden, and preserve a nice piece of rock in the core, which is sort of pictured down on the bottom right. Because that's how we geologists here on Earth actually study our own planet. They will drill these big rock cores, and they'll be able to look at all the layers inside that rock, and really look into the old history of the planet. And so we want to send a mission to Mars to get rock samples, rock core samples. And we decided to send this new mission to an area on Mars called Jezero Crater. Jezero Crater is pictured on the right there. It's this big crater that at one point was created by a giant asteroid hitting it. Then at one point it filled in with water, because billions of years ago, Mars had water. And so it collected in the bottom of that crater and made this giant lake. And so we want to send our rover right inside that crater and look around at what was the bottom of this lake, the lake bed of this lake. And we're sending it to the side of the crater where we believe there was a little river flowing into that lake. And so we'll be able to see not only the things that might have grown and existed on the bottom of the lake for many years, but also the things that were the sediments that were brought in by the rivers. And so the way that we're going to collect these rock cores is through a rover, a robot. So this robot is about the size of a small SUV. Its head stands up about 7 feet tall. It can reach its arm out about 7 feet in front of it. This giant arm has a big, we call it's like a hand. It has a bunch of tools on it. We call it the turret, and it has some science instruments. It has a contact instrument to help us know where we can identify where the surface is, but it also has a giant drill in it, a powerful drill. And so we can place this turret on the ground, and we can use a set of drill bits to drill into the rock. And we actually have 3 different types of tools that we can use, 3 different types of drill bits to study the rocks. The primary one that we're going to be using is a coring drill. This is how we're going to drill into the rock and pull out those nice cylinder pieces of rock that we want to preserve, so that we can bring those back to Earth and study them and see if we can find ancient life inside those rocks. Another type is called a regolith bit. That's the one pictured in the middle on the bottom. Regolith is basically loose rocky material or sand as we know it. We can pick up some samples of sand dunes and save it inside of a tube as well. And then on the bottom right is what we call a rock abrasion. So we have a certain type of bit that can drill into the top of a rock and just go down maybe like 10 millimeters or so to clear out the top layer of the rock, so that we can see the nice preserved layer underneath. It's a very nice flat surface for us to take some really clear images with our sorry about this. I don't know if you can see that, but oh boy. Okay, sorry about that. It removes the top layer of the rock so that we can take pictures of it with our science instruments that are also on the end of that turret. And so I was the lead engineer for all of the rover's drill bits. And so here's a picture of my team standing in front of the drill bits that we have just built in our clean room. And we're so happy and we're smiling ear to ear, except you can't see it because we're covered head to toe. And the reason why we're covered head to toe is because we had to be extremely cautious about making sure that this hardware was clean. And by clean, we mean not only making sure it doesn't have any oils or particles on it, but that when we're building it and handling it, we don't accidentally transfer any small piece of dust or our hair or like our pet's hair, or we don't drool on it. There's a lot of precautions we have to take to make sure that when we send these parts that are going to be touching another planet and looking for signs of life, that we don't accidentally send something from Earth that gives us a false reading. And so that's why we had to be very cautious and wear these, we call them bunny suits, to cover ourselves up head to toe. And so here you can see all the drill bits lined up. There's actually 9 bits here. We sent 1 regolith bit, 6 coring bits, and 2 abrading bits. And then I also want to point out the picture in the middle is what we call a sample tube. This is what is actually going to hold our rock core. And so the regolith bit and the 6 coring bits are actually hollow on the inside. And if you can see this cutaway picture here on the bottom right, we can fit a sample tube right inside those guys. And so when we drill, the rock goes right inside the front end of that sample tube. And when we get our loose rocky material, we can dump it right inside that sample tube. And then we put a seal on the front of that sample tube so that it's preserved and protected while we store it on Mars, waiting for it to be brought back to Earth. And then the picture on the bottom right, or the bottom left, is a set of different types of rock core material that we expect to be able to gather. So we did some research on some past missions, and we figured out what were some rocks that we might encounter when we're on Mars. And we found we went around here on Earth, and we found different analogs, different types of rock that are similar to the ones we might find. So there's some soft rocks all the way up to some very hard rocks, and we tested everything in between for for a long time. And then here's a bunch of pictures of just the work that I did to develop and create these bits. So lots of design work, lots of analysis. And then once we were ready to start building, we sent them to many different stages of fabrication. So there's brazing our teeth in, machining things, putting coatings on them, testing them in a thermal chamber, working in the clean room, very cautiously with sterile tools and bunny suits. Our contamination control and planetary protection engineers did a lot of sampling of the hardware to make sure it passed all of its cleanliness requirements. And then finally, here on the bottom right is our technician actually installing each of the drill bits inside of the bit carousel where they live on the rover. And so meanwhile, while our team is off developing the whole drilling assembly and the drill bits and all of that, there's a bunch of other teams on our lab that are building all the other parts of the rover. So there's the head or the mast of the rover that gives us a really basically a human's point of view with a bunch of cameras on it. It also has an instrument called the SuperCam. We also had a team making all of our wheels and our mobility system. We had a team making the robotic arm, which holds our turret. And then, of course, the giant body of the rover, which holds not only our sample storage assembly, but also a bunch of other science instruments and electronics and all of that stuff. So lots of people worked on this to bring it together. And this is the giant clean room that we call the high bay, where they would assemble that whole rover. Here it is getting packed up inside of its cruise stage, which is the giant stack up assembly that it would fly to Mars in. And one thing I want to point out is we're looking in the bottom left picture, we're looking at the bottom of the rover sitting nicely inside that heat shield. And at the bottom on this gold plate here, there's something mounted there. That thing is actually a helicopter. We sent a helicopter with this rover, and it's really just a demonstration to show that we can fly anything on Mars. And once we prove it's successful, perhaps it means that we'll be able to send more and more flying missions to Mars. So once everything was packed up, we were able to successfully launch the rover from Florida on July 30th of 2020, which of course was right during the pandemic, so it was a very challenging time for us to be trying to work and finish that up. But we couldn't miss our launch date. Didn't matter if there was a pandemic, we had to continue working because we had a very small window of time that we would be able to launch between between Earth and Mars. And that's because the way that Earth goes around the sun and the way that Mars goes around the sun in a much larger orbit means that every 2 years they're actually pretty close in their orbit to each other. And that's when we can quickly and efficiently launch things between those two planets. And if we miss that window, we have to wait another 2 years before we can launch again. So we had to hit our deadline. And finally, in February of earlier this year, is when Perseverance was ready to land on Mars. And this is one of the riskiest parts of the mission, and there's many stages that are involved. This is just a diagram showing how we enter in our heat shield and we deploy a giant parachute. We get rid of our forward heat shield so that we can start to detect and look at the ground and figure out where we want to land. And then we separate from our giant parachute and come down on a powered descent, or basic like a jet pack. Like we come down on this giant jet pack to slow us down, and we hover above the ground and we lower the rover down on these cables that we call the sky crane. And then the wheels touch the ground. We cut those cables. That's the jetpack flies away, and the rover is safely on the surface of Mars. And everything you see here happens automatically in 7 minutes. So it's incredible. It's an incredibly risky thing that happens, but we were successful. And so this picture on the top left is everybody celebrating because we landed successfully. And I was very lucky to be able to be involved in a lot of media outreach. So here's me interviewing with some TV stations. And then on the right are two snapshots of me actually part of a documentary series, and they followed me around for the day to ask about my involvement with it and get my reaction of the landing. So, and you can see here, one of my biggest reaction is that I just want to hug somebody, which is so telling of pandemic times, because I had to watch right here in my apartment and I couldn't be with my team or my family. But nonetheless, it was still just an incredible day. And so after we landed successfully, after we landed successfully, we were able to send back a bunch of images and videos. And so these are a bunch of videos that were taken during the landing sequence. So you can see the heat shield being separated here. In the top right, you can see the parachute being deployed. In the bottom left, you can see the rover looking at the ground as it gets closer and closer. And then here in the bottom middle pictures are the sky crane operation happening. And then finally, in the bottom right, you can see the surface of Mars finally come into focus as we're touching down. These videos are just so incredible. And so the first thing we did, of course, was take a picture. In the top picture is the very first image that was sent down by Perseverance. It's a little bit grainy and dusty because this is actually a clear cover that we have on the cameras to protect them. And then we deploy that camera cover out of the way, and then we can take a nice clear image of the area that we landed on Mars in Jezero Crater. And so then one of the first things that we wanted to do was deploy the mast, the head of the rover, and then start taking a bunch of pictures just to get a status of everything, to make sure everything was safe and to get an idea of what's around us. Where did we land? What does it look like? And so here you can see the landscape of Jezero Crater. And then here's a bunch of, they asked us to sort of like look in at all of these images of the top of the rover to just make sure that everything looks like it's intact and nothing was damaged. And two of the pictures that I paid close attention to, of course, was this one here that showed the turret with the drill holding one of my drill bits in it, and I could see it safely on Mars. And then over here, another great image is the top of the bit carousel assembly, and the bit carousel is what holds all 9 of the drill bits that I sent. So it was nice to see these 2 images come back down. Then we continue doing more checkouts. The top one is our first drive. The bottom left is us wiggling our wheel to make sure that works. And then the bottom right is us moving our arm around and moving our turret around to make sure everything there is working. And then after all the checkouts, they decided, let's get the helicopter going. So they deployed the helicopter from underside beneath the belly of the rover, and then they drove out of the way so that the helicopter could get ready for its first flight. And then it took a selfie. So here's the rover is able to take selfies because it has a camera at the end of its arm, and it can take a bunch of pictures, and we stitch them together to get this image. And so this is just an awesome image of a rover taking basically a group selfie of itself with Ingenuity, the helicopter, behind it getting ready to do its first flight. And so here's Ingenuity getting ready for its first flight, did a checkout to make sure its propellers are working. And then down at the bottom, you can see in the middle of the screen, there's a little speck. That's the Ingenuity helicopter flying up and hovering above the surface for just a few minutes. And then it comes back down and touches down again. And that was the first demonstrated powered flight on another planet. So that success was just another really big achievement for our team. And of course, they continued after that to do more flights. So this is another flight that the helicopter did. It's actually hovering above the ground in this image. And you can see at the very edges of the picture, there's it's the little feet of the helicopter. And then over in the top area, you can see some rover tracks. And then way up in the bottom, in the top left corner, there's something there. That's actually Perseverance. So this is a picture of a flying robot taking a picture of a driving robot on another planet. So this is just an incredible picture. It's so cool to see. And then here's another really cool video. This is actually the helicopter looking down at the ground, and what you're seeing there is the shadow of the helicopter flying over the surface of Mars. And then after this, after those successful missions, of course, the helicopter is still continuing to do some flights. I think they're, oh gosh, I think they're up to 9 successful flights so far. And each time they're just trying to go farther and trying to take more pictures. And really get a good use out of that demonstration. But meanwhile, we wanted to move on with our mission and start to get ready to grab our first sample, which is really exciting for me because that's the area that I worked on. And so they drove to this area of Mars and saw just a beautiful crop of rocks there, and wanted to find a sample target in this area, and they sure did. So one of the first things they did was take a rock abrasion. So this picture in the top right is the first time that we abraded a rock with an abrading bit. You can see the picture of the abrading bit there in the top left. So that was really exciting to see. And then, of course, the first rock core was taken on August 6th of 2021. And so down here in the bottom right, you can see a little hole here with the tailings coming out of it. And this is a picture of the front of the coring bit, so that we could see the status of the teeth and see that everything was okay. And then here's a verification that we grabbed a rock core. The rock core is sitting right there inside of the bit. And then we passed it inside the rover where it was able to take some detailed pictures of the sample tube with the core inside of it. And so they stepped a camera through there to see, to actually look at that rock core. And so that was just a really another just wonderful day for our team to show that everything that we had worked on for many, many years is finally actually successfully working on Mars. And so all of these pictures, I just wanted to point out, I grabbed them from our mars.nasa.gov/Mars 2020 website. We put a ton of pictures up there. All the pictures that we get from the rover actually get pushed right to that website. So you can go to the raw images area of that website and see what the rover is doing today. So if you're ever interested what the rover is doing right now on Mars, take a look at those pictures, the raw image pictures on that website, and you can see what it's doing. And this is the latest selfie that it took. This is right here in the foreground of this picture. You can see the rock and 2 drilled holes on it. And there's the rover just proud of its work after drilling its first rock core samples on Mars. So that's everything I got. I definitely wanted to make sure that I left some time for questions. So why don't I open it up to that?
All right, Aaron, that sounds great. And thank you for those amazing pictures, those amazing videos of just the picture quality is just amazing. And the helicopter flying on another planet, the drill bits all in their place doing their thing. What from start to finish, an amazing mission that's going to be going for a while.
Yeah, it's been just one of the best highlights of my career. I mean, my short career, but it's just an amazing thing to be part of.
All right. Well, there's a few classrooms who are joining us in camera spots who are unable to connect their mics and camera, which is no big deal. They can type me some questions in the private chat, and I'll make sure that we work some of those questions in. Those tuning in via YouTube, use the chat on YouTube to do the same thing and send in some questions. But for now, let's meet a few of our live groups. So Mr. Shattuck's crew, 678 in Chalk River. We're ready for you.
How long did it take you to make the drill bits?
That's a great question. So the question is, how long did it take us to build this? It takes, well, for one, the whole mission, building an entire rover, takes a long time. I would think that it took about maybe 10 years, maybe more than that, from the very beginning of deciding what it might look like all the way into getting into more detailed designs and doing testing to actually finally building it. But there are people like me who jump in at a certain point in the mission when they're ready for us, and we build our parts for it and we deliver it and they assemble it onto the rover, and then we're done with our part of that mission. So I spent about 5 years on this rover. And then after I finished building the drill bits and installing those into the rover, I moved into another phase of the mission where we did testing, and we made it's called qualification testing, and we basically actually created a big testing chamber that it feels like Mars's atmosphere. We can make it very cold. We can make the atmospheric pressure very low. We can put sand boxes and rocks inside there, and we can practice drilling in an environment that feels like Mars. So I did that for another 2 years.
All right, great question to get us started. We're going to jump back and forth between some YouTube questions. So I'm going to grab one here now from Miss Erlinson's group. They're wondering, how far has the helicopter traveled so far?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know the exact number, but I know that they were working their way up to being able to basically fly the length of a football field. And so if you can imagine flying the length of a football field and then flying back, so that's about the size, the length that it would be. There might be more, because that's at least one flight, and they have to build up to that. So they've definitely worked their way up and gotten a little bit farther and a little bit farther.
All right, very cool. Let's grab another one of our camera classrooms here. Oops, let me just switch over. There we go. So let's go now to Mrs. Farr's class is joining us. They are in Ontario. They're a grade 7 and 8 class. Let's see if we can bring them front and center. Oh, I lied. Looks like they might have ducked out. So instead, we'll grab our 3rd and 4th graders with Mrs. T. We'll bring them in.
What different rocks have you found?
That's a great question. So, like I was saying, Mars and Earth are very similar. So what that means is that the rocks that we find on Mars are actually, we can find a lot of similar rocks here on Earth, and those are rocks that are either created by like a sandstone is a type of rock that is made by some ancient sand dune becoming hardened over time and creating a sandstone, and that's actually a very soft rock that we can drill into. There's also mudstone, similar, made out of ancient mud. There's also things like basalt, which is a type of rock that is made from volcanic activity or volcanic rock, and those tend to be pretty hard. So whenever we're trying to test out a challenging rock, we'll usually use a basalt, because it's usually one of the harder, tougher, more challenging rocks that we might encounter. And so all of these types of rocks are made by the same kinds of things that are here on Earth too. So things like volcanoes and water and sand, that kind of stuff.
All right, so let's grab a couple questions here from our camera classrooms that they sent in the chat. So this first one is from Miss Reed's crew from Nakusip Secondary, and they're wondering, that jetpack that lowered down the rover, what was the fate of that jetpack?
Yeah, unfortunately, the jetpack did its duty to slow us down as we're descending to Mars. It does a really good job of slowing us down, and not only slowing us down, but keeping us very steady and stable, so that we can lower the rover down underneath it on those cranes or those ropes. Once we touch the wheels of the rover down on the ground, we cut the cables that are holding the jetpack, and then we allow the jetpack to just fly away. We don't want the jetpack to accidentally fall down and hit the rover, or get too close to the surface and kick up a bunch of dust and rocks that might cover our cameras or might damage hardware. And so we want to make sure that the jetpack is far enough away from the rover, and so it flies a certain distance away and it just crash lands somewhere else on Mars. And there's actually some pictures that we've gotten from satellite images where we can see where the rover has landed here, and then we can see the parachute has landed over here, and we can see the jetpack has landed over here. So it's kind of cool. So one day when we get to Mars, we'll find those pieces of hardware and maybe put them in a museum or something.
Very cool. Let's bring in Mr. DeRush's crew. They are joining us, grade 5, 6.
We're going in. Hey
everyone, how are you?
Yeah, good. How are yourself? So I got a question from Michael. Actually, I got two. I'll just go for one right now. Were there any problems while building the rover?
Were there any problems while building Rover? I mean, we encountered, of course, as engineers, making a very challenging thing, we run into all kinds of problems. Um, Luckily, the way that we at NASA will plan things out is to do a bunch of experiments and development testing all along the way. And so these, when we're coming up with the early concepts of our design, we come up with something that we think will work. And then when we get to a point where we're like, I think this will actually work, they'll build what we call a development unit or an engineering development unit. And then we'll start testing with that right away just to see, like, does this concept work? Is there anything that we're not thinking about that might go wrong with this? And so if it fails in that location, it's not a big deal because we have enough time to fix it. It's just an early thing. And so we learn a lot from those types of development units. And so then once we learn a bunch from that kind of testing, then we'll go into another phase of designing to fix all the things that we need to make our final adjustments and everything before we make our final actual designs. And then one of the tricky things is that just because everything's on such a fast time scale, for the qualification testing that I was doing, we had already launched. So the rover was flying on its way to Mars and we were doing our qualification testing. But at that point, we've already done the work to make sure that the hardware is going to work, that it's not going to break. But if there's something tricky in the operations or the way that our rover communicates, we can find that out in qualification testing, and we can come up with ways to fix it through just the motions that we do and the software that we put into it.
All right, let's jump back to YouTube here. Looks like Mr. Rentzklass is joining us, and they're curious, outside of the moon and Mars, are there any destinations for NASA spacecraft to explore that you're really excited about?
Yeah, so that we send things to all kinds of places in our solar system, not just Mars. We also send we've sent missions to Jupiter, to Saturn. We've sent the Voyager missions, which were some of our earliest satellites, were sent out to explore deep space. So that was the first mission to sort of pass by all of those deep space planets like Jupiter and Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, past Pluto. It got our first images of Pluto, and then now it's actually gotten to the point where it's exiting our solar system. I think one of them we lost communication with, and one of them is still sending very, very small, vague signals back. So we've been able to study all of our planets. We've also studied different asteroids. And been able to try to take samples of different asteroids. One of the really interesting things that we're on the horizon that we want to be able to study is a place called Europa. And Europa is a moon around Jupiter. It's a giant moon, and it's covered in ice. And we believe that below this giant sheet of ice is actually water, like a liquid water. And we know that if there's ever water somewhere, there's a potential for life. And so we want to send missions to Europa to try to maybe potentially land on the ice and potentially drill into that ice and see what we can find. And of course, I just want to also mention that we send a lot of missions up into space to study Earth. So we have a very robust Earth science division too, that studies everything about our waterways, different like carbon emissions and all that kind of stuff.
All right, very cool. I think we forget that sometimes, that there's a lot we can learn looking right back down at our planet. Okay, Mrs. Geary's grade 4-5s are joining us, and the big question here, I thought this might come up, how much did it cost to build that rover?
That's a good question. I actually don't know the actual amount, but yes, it is expensive. We're talking billions of dollars. But I always like to explain, sometimes people like to put it in the frame of, if everybody at least in the United States, were to go buy a movie ticket, that's about how much it costs. So like that's not so much to pay if you're getting this much science back. Another thing to think about is that it's been a mission, I don't know, going on for 10 years, and it has been able to employ a bunch of scientists and engineers for that amount of time. We've come up with a lot of the technologies that we come up with end up having other uses here on Earth and help enhance life here for humans. And so all of that is not lost cause. But also, if you were to add up how much it costs Target corporation to run for 10 years, it might be a lot of money, just like it's very expensive to run a place like NASA for that long. So it's a relatively small amount of money for what we get out of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. A ton of research, a ton of new technology. And of course, I mean, being able to reach out and see other places is just something really inherently exciting about that. Okay, where should we go next? Let's pop in a couple camera groups here. Let's go back to Mrs. T's crew. I think I see someone waiting. Hey, how are you?
Hello. And which book is your favorite book at the back?
Back here?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, that's a great question. So I have a lot of reading to do. I actually bought a lot of books during quarantine because I wanted to support local bookstores. But if I were to have to pick a favorite book, I actually have a book. I have the Hidden Figures book. I don't know if you've heard it or seen the movie Hidden Figures. It's about the early days in NASA in the 1960s. And there was a group of Black women who were they called them computers. They were human computers, and that's because they were able to do very complicated math very quickly. And this is the time before computers, the time before calculators. They did it by hand. They did it on chalkboards. They did it using their mind, and they were able to compute things very quickly and very accurately for NASA. And for a long time, just because of the way that race works in our nation, they weren't as recognized for the contributions they made at the time. But that book really highlights the amazing things they did for us. And so I love it because it's just I can relate. Just being a Native American at NASA, there's just not very many Native Americans that work at NASA, and that's just due to a lot of things, access to a good education and things like that. But I just want to help increase those numbers and increase the representation of Natives in the STEM fields.
All right, fun question. Let's grab one more from YouTube. So some grade 7s are hanging out with us, and they're wondering, do you think there's a way to speed up the timeline between rover launches? Obviously, it's a long process, lots of testing, new technology. They're wondering if there's a way to make the process faster.
One way that they make things faster is that they will borrow or use a lot of designs from previous missions. So if you were to see the picture of Perseverance and a picture of the Curiosity rover, Curiosity was sent up to Mars and landed there in 2012. And it's the same design. You can see that it's the same giant body design, the same wheel design, the same mast or head design, also similar arm and turret design. Because we were able to use a lot of those similar designs, and because we know that they've already successfully worked on Mars once before, it really helped us speed up the amount of time that we were able to make this new rover. And the same will be for the next one. If we want to send another one, we know what works and we can build it faster. But yes, everything, our missions take a long time to develop. It just takes a long time for us to test and design and make sure that what we're doing is going to be 100% successful when we send it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no second chances when you strap something on a rocket. And then, repairs are definitely not a real possibility on Mars.
Right.
Okay. Well, I think this is actually, let's bring Mr. Shattuck's class for a quick one.
Why did you want to work at NASA? Why not?
I think I heard, why do I want to work at NASA? And I didn't hear the last part.
Why not a different job?
Oh, and not a different job. Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. I really love my job at NASA. I love that the things that I'm doing is helping to explore or helping to expand the knowledge of our solar system, our universe, for everybody. It's not just for me. It's not just for a company. It's not just to make money. It's so that we can just learn more and add knowledge to about ourselves, for humans, about ourselves. And I love studying Mars because, like I said, when we learn about Mars, every time we send a mission there, we're learning more about terrestrial planets. We're learning more about Earth. We're learning more about our own planet, how we developed, how life developed here. And so that feels good to know. But also NASA is just like, they do such challenging work, and everything is so different. Every 5 years, I join a new project, which might be going to a different planet or an asteroid or a moon or something, and it's just something that I wasn't doing at all the previous 5 years, and I usually have to learn a bunch of things for my job that I've never had to do before, and so it's never gets boring. I'm just always learning and growing.
All right, and Aaron, I think this is a great spot to wrap up here. This question's coming from our crew joining us in British Columbia. There's another big part of this mission coming up, and they're wondering about the samples. What's kind of the timeline for returning some samples back to Earth?
Great question. That actually is, I'm actually finished with my time on Mars 2020, and I'm on the next mission. It's called the Mars Sample Return Lander. And so if we zoom out and look at gathering these samples a bit, we call it the Mars Sample Return Campaign. So the first part, it's maybe 3 different legs. The first leg of it is to send Perseverance to Mars so that it can grab samples and save them. It'll store it on the rover for a little bit of time, but once it finds a nice safe location on Mars, it'll likely drop a couple of those, like a certain set of those samples on the ground on Mars in a safe cache deposit. And then it will continue and get more samples. And then right now I'm working on the next mission, which is a lander. This lander is going to send a little fetch rover that's going to be able to drive out and grab those samples that we left on the surface and bring them back to the lander. Another thing on the lander is what we called a Mars Ascent Vehicle, which is basically a rocket. And so we're going to pack it inside the front of this, a canister on the front of this rocket, and that rocket is going to be able to launch into space from Mars. And this is the first time that we're ever going to attempt launching something from the surface of Mars into space. Once it gets into space, it'll stay in an orbit around Mars while we send a third mission. We're sending 3 missions. This third mission is going to fly to Mars and capture those samples that are orbiting around Mars, and then bring them back to Earth and land them here on Earth so that we can study those samples here on Earth.
All right. Well, I mean, you can see why these take some time. There's a lot of calculations, hardware, machinery, trial, and I'm sure it just goes on and on, re-engineering to make this work. But wow, what an amazing success that will be if we're able to return those samples from Mars. Pretty amazing. Well, I want to start off with a huge shout out to all of our YouTube classrooms who joined us today. Thank you for sending in so many great questions. To our camera classes, thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for sending in those awesome questions as well. And then Aaron, it is always a pleasure to have you joining us here, sharing a little bit about, you know, your family, your culture, and where you came from, and your other family at NASA and the incredible work that you do with them. So it's, again, great to have you with us today, Aaron.
Thanks so much. It was really fun talking to all of you.
All right. Well, we're going to sign off for today. Don't forget, we still have one more event starting at 2 p.m. Eastern, and then a full day of events tomorrow before we wrap up this year's Secret Path Week. Have a great rest of the week, everyone, and hopefully we'll see some of your classrooms soon. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Aaron.